Hello and welcome, I'm Ali Mustafa and this is Strait Talk. Turkey's narco-terrorists. We bring you a special report from the country's southeast, where a crackdown is targeting a global drug network. Plus, will 2018 be the year of Turkey's rapprochement with Europe? We break down President Erdogan's visit to France to see if it could signal the start of a much-needed thaw. And we take you to Bulgaria, where the renovation of a mosque is being reciprocated with a church makeover here in Istanbul. The PKK. It's a terror group that has waged war against the Turkish state, killing tens of thousands of people. But what many may not know is that the militants operate an extensive drug trafficking network to partially fund its activities. The PKK not only poses a security threat, its activities are now threatening a public health disaster. That's according to the Turkish government, which has spent millions training special units to tackle the PKK's narco-terrorists head-on. Strait Talk's Courtney Keeley spent time with these security forces in the first installment of a two-part series on Turkey's war on the PKK.
The Jandarma, a wing of the Turkish armed forces, roll out from a base in Diyarbakir in southeastern Turkey. Helicopters transport the troops, and sniffer dogs help root out drugs and smugglers on the ground. This region has been a stronghold for the PKK militant group and its narco-terrorism operation for decades. Turkish security forces say the PKK pulls in hundreds of millions of dollars annually from illegally cultivating cannabis and smuggling here. The PKK has fought the Turkish government with similar tenets of Marxist ideology that the FARC fought for in Colombia, but mixed it with its own Kurdish separatist nationalism. They have killed thousands of Turkish civilians and have members and affiliates in Iran, Syria, and Iraq. Its top leadership has been listed on the U.S. drug kingpin list for nearly a decade.
And we know that not a bird can fly around here without PKK knowing it. So even if only one shoot of cannabis is planted here, PKK definitely knows about this.
Yahya Ower says Turkish authorities seized 85,000 tons of drugs last year, which equals the total amount seized in the previous 15 years.
But here the biggest factor that affects their success is the need for international intervention on the routes terror organizations use to move drugs. Illegal terrorist organizations need to be removed.
But he says it's drug trafficking by other terrorist organizations, as well as the PKK, that will require a multi-pronged international approach.
We can clearly see that in the Middle East, especially in Afghanistan, Iran, Iraq, and Syria, the drug trade has been the main source of income.
With its ancient land and sea trade routes, Turkey remains a key transit country to move drugs to and from Europe. Heroin is also moved from Iran and the Strait of Hormuz to the UAE, where it's shipped through the Red Sea into the Mediterranean to dock in Turkish ports in or near Hatay. Meanwhile, synthetic drugs like methamphetamines are routed into Turkey from Europe, bound for the Middle East and Gulf Arab countries. Turkish media often reports news of drug busts. This report from last June says Turkish authorities confiscated more than 1,000 kilograms of heroin with an approximate market value of $50 million. A report from October says Turkish anti-narcotics police seized more than 2.5 million ecstasy pills, more than 55 kilograms of heroin, and 600 kilograms of cocaine, as well as opium, cannabis, and lab chemicals in simultaneous operations across the country. Basic training for anti-drug operations starts here at police headquarters in Ankara.
This is where all the national police train before they're deployed across the country for their narco-terrorism operations.
Ahmet Murat Yilmaz, who has built his reputation policing organized crime and drug smuggling rings in Turkey over the last several decades, says Turkey is currently working with the UN and European countries.
So how do you deal with the combination of terrorists like Daesh and the PKK, and then organized crime like the mob guys,
Yes.
the people that are moving it through villages
Yes.
that might not be associated with the terrorists, but they also depend on organized crime, don't they?
Yes, yes. That's they are doing the same. They are using all the same ways to smuggle the drug into the country. We are also doing the same with them. We are doing the same procedure with them also, because if we start to investigate a case, we don't know if it's a normal organized crime group, or is it a terrorist group.
Turkish special forces and attack dogs trained for maximum effect in disarming and clearing operations.
What's the toughest borders that you have to control the most, or are you on every border now?
We are on every border. There's nothing to say this is more. We are weak there. We are always everywhere.
Operations continue throughout Turkey on an almost daily basis, but its central location in the web of transnational drug routes presents a Herculean task. Courtney.We, Strait Talk.
And to discuss this further, I'm joined in the studio once again by Courtney.We. You briefly touch upon organized crime in the report. How is the PKK linked to organized crime according to the Turkish authorities?
Everyone's linked to organized crime who's at this point a narco-terrorist or involved in global terrorism. So I mentioned FARC in the piece. Now, the PKK is not on FARC's level, but what they have in common is the Marxist ideology. They have in common is both being on the terrorist list and both being on the kingpin list. The PKK, what it did was it came out of the 80s, where it was allowed to stay in the Bekaa Valley, where everyone knows Lebanese hashish has always come from. When they moved into the southeast of Turkey and started their real war in the 90s in their separatist movement, all of the crops there turned to cannabis. So they tax all those crops. They also tax anything that's coming in and out. So when you saw on that map, Diyarbakir also sits near, not next to the Iranian border, but other conduits like Van and Karsh. So that PKK territory is very hard to permeate. They can not only tax the farmers or be involved in low-level cultivation, but they can be taxing and moving it. And they have been involved over the decades in wholesale smuggling. The issue that Turkey is facing is not just the PKK. It's that everything has changed. I mean, if you looked at the 90s and the PKK, that was one fight, one narco-terrorism fight. But what you have now with the destabilization of Syria and Iraq, countries coming in, countries that are running things in from the Balkans and from Europe, the mass production of synthetics. Turkey is fighting a battle on all of its borders and in the air.
So what are we talking about? We're talking about heroin, we're talking about cocaine, we're talking about these kinds of...
Heroin, cocaine, methamphetamines that are coming from Europe that are making their way to the Middle East and the Gulf Arab countries. Cocaine is being flown in, like that report that they stopped a man in Nigeria. It's also coming up through all the containers. I mean, what makes this country so beautiful with its ports and its land bridge,
well, we are
its access. All of these are ways for people to move drugs.
You mentioned FARC in your report briefly as well. A slight difference there, whereas FARC was, producing cocaine and cultivating the crops as well. The PKK gets its money from transit.
Yes, from taxing, from smuggling. Cannabis is kind of, it's $100 million, but it's not the hundreds, potentially billions of dollars of other kinds of drugs that are moved. Another thing that's really changed the equation is the Taliban. They are moving massive amounts of heroin at an unprecedented and unabated rate, and that's going to Pakistan, that's going to Iran. This is not the route that goes up into America. This is a whole separate route that goes into Europe.
So wait, it comes from Afghanistan or further east, passes through Turkey, then where does it go?
Europe.
Russia, Europe, Georgia?
Right. And then you have this new drug crackdown that most of the world doesn't know, but was used in Syria. It's an amphetamine. People thought it kind of came up around 2013, 2014. What happened was Daesh stumbled on these labs for this synthetic, started making it, apparently started using it to fight, and made a lot of money off of it. That was one of the ways. The Syrian drug smuggling route has always been in effect. It kind of fell into Daesh's hands for a while. This crackdown became something that appeared on the market. It has a big market for the Middle East. Also in Bulgaria, chemists are producing it and sending it through this way. And the biggest problem for Turkey, for children or teenagers or people susceptible to being involved in the drug trade, is the pills. Because they're cheap, they're easy, they're just in your hand. So when I talked to the NGO Green Crescent, the regional director in Diyarbakir, he said when they arrested kids in that region, they're drug dealers that are teenagers as young as 12, and what they're finding is some of these synthetics. He didn't even want to use the word bonsai because he didn't want it to get into the lexicon so kids would start looking for it. So in that kind of area, those pills are a real problem too. So you've got the larger money and moving of drugs like heroin, cocaine that can contribute to organized crime strengthening, the PKK strengthening, and global terrorism strengthening, and all of them working together. And then you've got the other problem, which is nobody wants to see any of these pills fall into their kids' hands.
Fascinating discussion, Courtney, and be sure to watch the second part of Courtney's special coverage, this time on the rebuilding of historic Sur in Diyarbakir on January 19th. 2017 will go down as the year when Turkey's relations with Europe hit an all-time low. From the fallout of the failed coup in 2016 to a crisis in confidence among diplomats and heads of state, cooperation was either halted or scrapped altogether on a range of issues. Possibly sensing that a hostile relationship is unsustainable, both sides are now showing a willingness to make amends. President Erdogan's recent trip to France was meant to reflect just that, but the visit was far from a full reversal in tensions, as Omer Kaplan reports from Paris.
Turkey has described France as a leading ally in the fight against terrorism, and France has urged the European Union to continue its ties with Turkey as both countries unite over their criticism of the US decision to recognize Jerusalem as Israel's capital. Will this year mark even stronger cooperation between them? He came prepared and ready to negotiate. This is President Erdogan's first visit to France since an attempted coup in July 2016 in Turkey. President Erdogan aims to improve relations with Europe. Erdogan and his French counterpart agreed on a number of issues, ranging from increased cooperation in the fight against terrorism to strengthening economic ties. High on the agenda was Turkey's European Union accession process, which is unlikely to happen anytime soon.
Pour ce qui est de la relation avec l'Union européenne, il est clair que les évolutions récentes et les choix ne permettent aucune avancée.
Zira sürekli olarak ne olur? Artık bizi de alıverin diyecek halimizde pek yok.
France has called on both sides to avoid further alienation. This month, Turkey's foreign minister was also invited by his German counterpart to his hometown, Goslar. Turkey's foreign minister has called for a fresh start with Germany after a war of words between the countries in 2017. This meeting is being seen as an important turning point between relations. And a lot is at stake. Germany is Turkey's largest trade partner, with more than $35 billion between them. While the two countries continue to disagree on many political issues, both say they are determined to put aside their differences.
I
believe we have the responsibility to find a way to get along, due to our historical legacy and the wishes of our citizens.
Zu einem guten Miteinander zu finden.
Karşılıklı anlayış, We can overcome our difficulties through dialogue and sincere cooperation, and we want to do so.
İlişkilerimizi çok daha iyi geliştirebileceğimize inanıyoruz.
If all goes according to plan, 2018 could be the year that reverses all the negative fallout from the failed coup of 2016 that badly strained ties between the EU and Turkey.
I think Turkey will continue looking west, but Turkey will also try to enhance their relationship to Russia, for example. But Russia is no alternative for the West. There is no alternative for NATO. Therefore, I think that Turkey will continue looking west. It's a strategic, it's a historical direction of Turkey. Turkey cannot stop this process.
It's still an open question whether that will be enough to restart Turkey's efforts to join the EU. Ömer Kablan, Strait Talk.
And to discuss this further, I'm joined in the studio by former Turkish ambassador to France, Uluç Özülker, and Hakan Akbaş. He's a senior advisor for the Albright Stonebridge Group. Thank you so much for being here. Let's begin with you, Ambassador. You spent a lot of time in France and in Brussels. What do you make of the current Turkey-EU relationship?
It's a difficult one in reality, because when the Turkish president went to meet with Macron in France, obviously we witnessed that there are many difficulties, remaining difficulties in this field. If I make a very short judgment in this respect, I think that they met and it was a friendly one. And on a bilateral basis, everything went quite good. There was nothing to say. But when I look to the figures that I have before me, in reality, we have a potential actually in the economic field. From 2002 to 2017 or 16, France has invested in Turkey 6.5 billion worth of investment, direct investment in Turkey.
Far less in Germany, but that's...
yes, but it's number 5 in Turkey, if I'm not wrong, in investment field. For example, when you consider the United States, it's only $3 billion altogether, whereas during the period during which the AKP is in power in Turkey, the French investments went up to 6.5 billion. It's not a bad figure. It's good.
So what's the big hang-up? Why is Turkey going cold on Europe as a whole, and vice versa?
I think that has to do more with what EU is going through these days in terms of its own challenges. If you begin with refugee crisis, if you begin with the military aggression from Russia, not to mention what's going on with Brexit. And also, politically speaking, we've had a number of elections, which I think destabilize each and every country in terms of the political or the populist movements have really moved to the center. That has inevitably created a vacuum in the leadership. And as such, that President Erdogan's visit to see Macron, I think, may open at least a new level of dialogue with EU. I wouldn't go as far as saying that Turkey would become an accession country again, but I think that everybody seems to have accepted the de facto frozen sort of state of relationships. But as Ambassador has rightfully pointed out, I think the trade and investment ties have been so persistent and so critical for both sides. Over 50% of the trade and 2/3 of the investments from EU to Turkey, I think remains indispensable for Turkey going forward.
Well, that's one thing, and the ambassador rightly pointed out the economic relationship is a silver lining of sorts, but there have been some dark clouds, including with the EU-Turkey migrant deal, which was reached in March 2016. That went south. Then after the failed coup of last year in July, a lot of tensions there as well on both sides, with Turkey making accusations against the Europeans. And then in March of last year with a referendum and rallies that were banned leading up to the referendum in April of that year in Europe. And then the referendum itself creating a lot of controversy as well.
I cannot say that when I look behind and try to see what happened in history with France, it's a sinusoidal cycle, if you wish. It's ups and downs, and it goes this way. But otherwise, bilaterally speaking, both countries need each other. For example, we have bought from France this time as well the Airbus planes, and plus the new missile systems or anti-missile systems.
I think I want to pick it up from the security perspective, and I think that Turkey will stay as an anchor within NATO, unlike some of the speculation about what Turkey may or may not do. The EU will become even more critically dependent on Turkey being the next door and an anchor NATO ally, especially in the vacuum that Trump is creating, both as a fear and a pushback to EU, but also maybe it's sort of not so strong commitment to NATO's future as the lead sort of partner.
So, Ambassador, has Trump then been able to bring the Europeans and the Turks closer together?
I wouldn't say so, because normally, as I said, Trump has withdrawn from the Paris Agreement, and now he's returning back to that agreement again. I think that establishment in the United States is winning again, is taking over the situation.
And does Turkey want to be a part of this?
Oh yes, 100%. Because Turkey is not American. Turkey is European in the end. And if in a European institution Turkey does not have its place as such, then it's risky. It's a problematic case.
Is Turkey European, or is it a part of the East?
Turkey, given where it is located, I think it needs to play its cards strategically with both US and EU. I think going forward, though, I'm cautiously optimistic about what EU and Turkey will do because of the circumstances. I think Trump's effect from the perspective of TTIP being dead and also pushing is sort of, I don't want to say decommitting from EU, but I think putting sort of more distance. And also Brexit, I think Turkey unfortunately lost two natural allies in terms of supporting its bid for full-time membership. But having said that, even these events, as Ambassador was saying, is bringing the remaining EU countries together.
Ambassador, thank you so much. Hakan Akbaş.
Thank you.
It was a pleasure. During the past 20 years, Turkey has restored 14 churches and synagogues. The most iconic building, the Iron Church, reopened just a few days ago after extensive renovations. The project was co-financed by Turkey and Bulgaria. In the segment of Straight Up with Adil Halim, we look at how religious minorities on both sides of the Turkey-Bulgarian border are faring.
As part of a reciprocity agreement between the two countries, the Bulgarian government gave their blessing to restore this 600-year-old mosque in Plovdiv. It's a place of comfort and safety for the many Turkish families who call Bulgaria home. A recent Pew Research Center study estimates 15% of Bulgaria's 7 million people are Muslim. Many are Turkish families who trace their roots to when the Ottomans ruled.
Bizim Bulgarlarla ortak bir tarihimiz var.
We have a shared history with Bulgarians, and we also get on well with other communities in Plovdiv. Because since the Ottoman times, Plovdiv has been a brotherly city.
Yahudilerle iyi anlaşıyoruz, Ermenilerle iyi anlaşıyoruz.
Plovdiv is Bulgaria's second largest city and one of Europe's oldest. During a recent trip to Greece, President Erdogan made it a point to praise Bulgaria as a good example of tolerance towards Turkish minorities. But there have been some frightening moments in recent memory. This mosque came under attack 4 years ago when hundreds of nationalists chanted racist slogans and smashed windows with stones, firecrackers, and torches.
There were the well-known problems in the past. Genocide campaigns were made, but recently there are also the blessings brought by the new age. Currently, the past troubles don't continue for sure.
Thanks to a bit of good faith, what's old is new again in Istanbul. The world's only surviving iron church has undergone an extreme makeover. Dating back to the 19th century, this 120-year-old Bulgarian church of Sveti Stefan needed a little freshening up.
We have been waiting for 7 years to come again here.
Turkey paid $4 million for the restoration project, and Bulgaria chipped in another $250,000.
Memories and happiness because, of course, we have many memories from childhood.
The neo-Gothic style church was recently reopened with flair. The hope for religious minorities on both sides of the border is that the blessings continue. Abdul Halim, Strait Talk.
And that's all for this edition of Strait Talk with me, Ali Mustafa. If you've got any comments or suggestions, do share them with us at #StraightTalk. Also, don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Until next time, take care and goodbye.